Welcome to this special APG event in partnership with Leo. I'm Sarah Newman, I'm the APG director, and I have three very quick things to say. Well, four in fact. First of all, to all of you for signing up and coming along this evening. It's great to see you. Second, to Leo, and in particular to James, who have brought to our attention this incredibly important issue and for encouraging us to get involved and form a partnership with them. It's certainly opened my eyes, and I think it will do the whole community. So thank you to you. Thank you to today's speakers. We will talk more to you and about you in a moment. And also to all of the APG award winners who gave up their time to read out their papers so beautifully and get involved in this whole initiative. Huge thanks to all of you. And without more ado, James, over to you.
Hi, everyone. And actually, I should say thank you so much, Sarah, because without you, there would be no book on Leo. And this is to everyone who's here tonight or this afternoon. It feels like tonight because it's dark, but this is the inspiration for the evening. Really, is that Leo is a platform which aims to bring the best of advertising thinking and advertising content, written content, to people who have dyslexia and other neurodivergencies. And we aim to do this by offering up books that adapt to the reader rather than the reader having to adapt to the book. So you can read the book, customize the text as you're reading it, so you can have the font you want, the colors you want, the background you want, the spacing that you want. But also, really importantly, you can listen to the book being read by the people who actually wrote these papers, of which there's 10 papers that are absolutely excellent, some absolute classics in there. And you can also watch the book being read as well, rather like we are at the moment, like a Zoom screen. So you can actually make a connection with the person who's reading it, and you can do all three of those things. And the book that's on Leo from the APG is, well, you might recognize the title, Thinking Sideways, because we borrowed it for the event as well. But the idea is to look at lateral thinking in planning and case studies where lateral thinking has led to a strategic breakthrough and therefore led to extraordinary creative work. And the reason we're doing that is because we believe that is one of the benefits of dyslexic thinking. And that is what we're really going to discuss tonight, because the advantages of dyslexic thinking, the advantages of being able to think sideways, feel like a pretty heady toolkit for a planner to have. I'm sure when you're writing briefs or thinking of strategies, those little leaps that you can make are the things that make for really exciting thinking and really exciting creative work. So what we're going to do is we have a panel. This is great. We're all mixed in, so at the moment you might not know who the panel is, but I kind of like that idea. But we've got a wonderful panel here, and we're going to be talking about dyslexia, about dyslexic thinking, about lateral thinking, about implications for planning. What would be great is if you have any questions, please share them in the chat as you go along. If they're relevant to what we're talking about at the time, we'll just feed them in. And if not, we do have time at the end where we can ask questions, or maybe if people want to, they can even go on mute and ask those questions themselves. However you're feeling, we can do it really. Anyway, I should stop talking and introduce the panel who've got more interesting things to say. So our first panelist is Aidan McClure. He is the founder and CCO of Wanderhood Studios, that I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. I also hope you don't mind this, Aidan, but given the time of year, I need to also point out that he is created behind one of the most famous and most beloved John Lewis ads, Christmas ads. So sorry, it's going to haunt you. The bear and the hair that you'll all remember, but I think that is a badge of honor. And really importantly for the discussion tonight, Aidan is also dyslexic. Kat Wild is also here with us. Really lucky to have her and have her back in the UK as well. She is Lucky General's first ever CSO, joined the agency this month. She has just returned to the UK from Canada, where she was CSO at Cassette, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Fantastic agency, the largest agency in that country. And for us, she's very special to us because she's also one of the readers on our new book on Thinking Sideways on the platform. So you'll be able to see her there. We're also joined, very lucky to be joined by John Stein, who's Emeritus Professor of Physiology at Oxford University. He's also founder of the Dyslexia Research Trust, and I'm playing it down here by saying he's one of the UK's leading experts in dyslexia. He's a global expert in dyslexia. So we're really happy to have him with us tonight. And then finally, but not least by any means, is Will Poskett, who many of you will know. He's a strategic director, ex of Saatchi, Wyden Kennedy, and Droga 5. I mean, that's quite a list already. And he's now the founder and strategy partner of Defiant. And he, as is the case with Aidan, is also dyslexic. So he will be bringing that perspective as well. Anyway, reminder, shoot those questions over when you have them, but we're just going to start talking now. And John, I think you're probably the best person to start us off. I've talked a tiny bit about the advantages of dyslexic thinking, but John, it would really help us, I think, all to understand how and why dyslexic thinking is different, and if you can, also what the advantages are to it.
Well, first of all, I must apologize that I have very little connection with the advertising industry, but I have been very interested in this. So what I'd like to do is remind you that every dyslexic is actually an individual. No two are the same. So my generalizations which follow don't apply to every dyslexic, but I hope you'll see that they have lots of these things in common. The crucial thing about dyslexia is that they have poor reading and spelling, but good or really excellent oral communication and non-verbal reasoning. So they have a discrepancy between their reading and most other aspects of their cognition. And the reason they have the trouble with reading is that they have unusual brains. And I wouldn't say they're abnormal brains, they're just unusual. And they're unusual in the way that because their setup of their brains, mainly by hereditary, is not good at what I call, what everybody else calls, linear thinking. And the reason they're poor reading is that linear thinking requires timing and sequencing. If you think about reading, think of the word dog. What you have to do is, when you think of yourself as a child to begin with, you have to look at the letter D in dog, and then the O, and then the G, and you've got to clock when you look at the D, you time when you look at the O, and time when you look at the G, and that gives you the sequence of letters in the word. Also, when you're hearing the sound of the word dog, you have to learn to separate the sounds in it, d or g. So it's again a timing problem. And what dyslexics are bad at is this timing and sequencing. Now, as I say, that's required for ordinary linear thinking, plodding, A equals B, B equals C, so A equals C. Those are all sequencing things which require this timing. And this timing depends upon a set of cells in the brain called magnocells. Doesn't matter about their name, but the point is that they're impaired in their development under hereditary control. And that means, because there is a competition early in development in a child's brain between different kinds of nerve cells, they're all involved in a harsh competition to make sure that they make good connections that are helpful in allowing the brain to think properly. Now, 90% of the neurons that are born actually don't pass this competition and they die. So that means if magnet cells, these timing cells, are impaired in their development, then other cells can fill the space. And in fact, most of the other cells are much smaller than these magno cells. Magno means large in Latin. Parvo means small. These small parvo cells can flourish. And there's lots of evidence that dyslexics have flourishing parvo cells, which gives them a different kind of way of thinking, not linear in the way that I was talking about dyslexics to fail, but in a holistic way. They have superior holistic vision. They have better detail, particularly in the periphery. They have it over a wider area. They can see patterns. They can see color, particularly in the periphery, much better than can ordinary brains. So they can pick up detail over a wider area in an instant. And this means that they have a sort of helicopter vision, so they can look down on a scene, and instead of having to go through the scene one by one, looking at neighboring things and so on, they can actually see everything in an instant. And that gives them this holistic kind of vision. But it doesn't actually apply just to vision. It applies to other systems as well. So let's think about hearing, which is the other one that's important for reading. When you hear the word dog, as I said, in order to match the sounds of the word dog with the visual letters of the word dog, you have to learn to pick up the sequence of sounds, d, o, g. Now, dyslexics are bad at that, but what they're good at is, as it were, hearing all the components of a tune, let's say, at once, and seeing the components of a chord, or hearing the components of a chord, and being able to detect the coloration, or the timbre, or the emotional tone. So all those things the dyslexics are better at. They're better at hearing the harmony all at once. Now, this kind of picking up on detail all at once generalizes to dyslexics' abstract thinking. That is so-called metacognitive style. That is thinking about thinking. And it enables them to have a different way of thinking, being able to imagine and predicting the outcomes of behavior. This holistic mindset allows them to see patterns that others don't. In particular, for instance, judgment of a personality, by taking all the factors into that bear on personality simultaneously, not going through them one by one, as it were, but seeing them all together, and therefore being able to see the pattern of the person's personality, and also to see things that don't fit. And in a similar way, they have a helicopter assessment of a situation in just an instant. This holistic thinking style explains dyslexics' creativity as well. If you can see every element of a problem all at once, then that enables you to use your imagination, or feeds your imagination, your originality, and your inventiveness. And it allows this lateral thinking, whereby you can move from one apparent train of thought to another, which to many people seems a illogical move, but you see connections that others don't see, and that makes dyslexics particularly aware of how all things fit together, and particularly good at seeing when things don't fit in, and therefore being aware of the possibility of that being the cause of problems. So to summarize, dyslexics, and there's lots of evidence for this, which I haven't had time to go into, dyslexics have an ability, a holistic cognitive style that enables them to see things in a different way, in such a way as to spot patterns and spot deviations from pattern, that makes them very creative.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for explaining a very complicated subject to us in a way that we can understand it. And actually, when you're talking about the kind of things that you're seeing, like being able to see every element at once, the ability to pick out patterns, the ability to find anomalies. If I could bring you here, they feel like kind of really useful things for a planner to have. And I just wonder, do you feel with your dyslexia that you approach planning in a different way to most other planners?
I think it's a great question. I think if, of all John said, there was three things that really stuck out to me. So the first idea of like helicopter vision or a holistic point of view, I think that's definitely like the way I would normally approach a brief, not intentionally, just like the way I'm designed, which is both great on, it's great for a big brand strategy project. But I remember in the beginning of my career doing like a direct mail brief, and my boss was like, just keep it small, mate, like don't get too ambitious. So, there are benefits to that and seeing the bigger picture and seeing the anomalies, as John said. I think the obvious answer as well, the second thing, is definitely lateral. Like one thing, when I've interviewed for jobs in the past, they go, what kind of planner are you? And I always say, well, I'm a weird idea. I love weird ideas, and that, that what I mean by that is, from a pragmatic point of view, the idea of lateral thinking, it's not just like turning up to a brief and having one lateral thought. I mean, the way I normally like to work is with a creative director and throw like 20 lateral thoughts at the room and see what sticks. I definitely agree with that. But I think if it's okay, the thing that really surprised me actually in all that John said was the idea about verbal and communication.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, Will, you've gone silent.
Will,
you've gone silent. We can't hear you. It sounded like it's going to be. It sounded like it's going to. Is Will dropped? Oh, no, he's still there. Will, can you try again? No, we can't hear you for someone else. Tell you what, Will, we'll bring you in again in a bit if that's okay. Yeah, is that okay with you? Maybe yes, thumbs up. There we go. We can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. Can everyone else hear me? I'm seeing lots of miming. Yes.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like Bluetooth to me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It could be the dreaded Bluetooth. Aidan, actually, can we move on to you then, and we will come back to you. So Will started talking there a little bit about helicopter views and about communication skills and about generating lots of ideas. And I just wondered how you kind of like found that, if you thought there are advantages to working with planners who can see things more holistically, who are making surprising connections, who are kind of like generating more quickly. What do you find?
So in terms of planners, I mean, is the question more that, what's the benefit of a planner? Or
yeah, well, no, I suppose the question is, what is the benefit of a planner who thinks in a more lateral way, who thinks in a more dyslexic way, versus one who's kind of like more linear in the way they think?
Yeah, I think my observation about briefs is, from a creative point of view, is they tend to be like almost a bit of a demonstration of cleverness up front and how smart you are. And then you boil it down to a proposition, I'm being a bit harsh here, that is just a little bit like, yeah, okay, fair enough. And I'm always a bit harsh on briefs. I love working really closely with planners because actually the strategical part of the process I find really, really interesting, maybe because of that helicopter thing. I love sort of getting into the strategy before, putting pen to paper with creative. So, and I'm quite critical of planners not being lateral enough. And, when you think about some of the best briefs, like Guinness or that Sainsbury's try something new today, or taking an incredibly complicated problem and simplifying it, and then looking at the data or, the research, and then picking something out and then finding a leap from that. I get really excited about that. And there was a brief last week from one of our planners where they just took something out of the data and then twisted it slightly and then created an amazing jumping off point. Now, I don't know if they were dyslexic or not, but it's kind of irrelevant. But for me, that was a brilliant sort of bit of planning. and it created an excellent lateral sort of jumping off point for creatives. And that just means that your end product as a creative, and we're currently working on the creative at the moment, and all the scripts, all the ideas are brilliant because they're all jumping off from this really lateral positioning that we got to. Now, if dyslexics get to that lateral place better, that's brilliant. I mean, because that's what we want as creatives. We want that lateral bit of thinking, not an end line. I hate that when planners write an end line and a bit of clever bit of writing that you just go, oh, I don't really know. What I like is a really simple thought that's lateral, you know, and I think that's incredibly hard to do. You know, it sounds really simple, but it's probably the hardest bit of the process, I think. And then selling that into the client as well, like in a really simple, convincing way, you know, that's another really important skill from a planner, you know, holding the client's hand, taking them through the data and the research and the thinking in a really convincing, logical, simple way, and then delivering this lateral jumping off point that, you know, someone who isn't creative or maybe isn't so confident around creative can go, yeah, I can really see how that's going to be brilliant. And I think that's a really great planner for me. And I think, you know, just listening to John's thoughts and, you know, really fascinating sort of insights into a creative brain, that seems like that would deliver that quite well, you know.
Yeah, and actually I was really interested as well whilst we sort of grabbed you here, and I realized you kind of like gone native here with all these planners, but you personally in your creative work, do you kind of like think that you think dyslexically and that helps you in coming up with ideas?
Yeah, it's sort of hard sometimes to step back and go, well, that's because of that. I mean, I suppose in terms of my personality and just listening to John again, and, you know, some things popped out for me, but I think my quality, apart from like the terrible spelling, terrible time management, terrible short-term memory and all of that sort of stuff, I think my added value is an ability to think around problems really. So I find problem solving really easy for some reason. And I don't know why, but things just pop into my head all the time. When someone gives me a problem, and my brain immediately tries to solve it. Now, I don't think I'm massively creative. Like, I'm really quite shit at drawing and painting. And I'm not a particularly great writer. I mean, I love writing, but it's not like my passion. I sit down and write books and, you know, I'm certainly, but what I love is problem solving. And I've always been like that as a kid. So I'd like take apart radios and try and put them back together again. And famously tried to unscrew a plug once and got blown across the room. But it's sort of, I love, like, I sort of see my job as going into a shed and sort of given a problem and then tinkering with it and trying to work out the solution through sort of creativity. And that's what sort of makes me tick. And I think that is slightly different to other people who maybe approach creative much more from, I don't know, maybe a linear way that sort of struck a chord, you know. I think I approach it from lots of different angles, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
No. Listen, it's really helpful, and I can see Will is here. Will, do you want to try speaking again? You were about to talk about the ability to communicate. Ironically, that's when the sound cut out. The ability to communicate well. Do you want to carry on with that point, if that's okay?
Yeah. Sorry about the ironic kind of like muting of my point about communication, but no, I agree. And I just wanted to touch very quickly on what Aidan said. Like, there's a lot of what Aidan said I can relate to as well. Like, you know, this kind of like, I didn't blow myself up with a plug, but I did have a habit of breaking things down and like dismantling things as a child and putting them back together. And I think that did help. You know, that is natively planning, isn't it? You break things down and you put them back together in hopefully the right way, sometimes in weird ways. But to go back to the point I was trying to raise, I think of all the things that John said, the thing that really interested me, or the thing that really resonated with me, look, I've been dyslexic, you know, I found out I was dyslexic when I was 19. They've always said, oh yeah, lateral thinking. So I think a lot of people know that. But the interesting thing is what he said about verbalization and communication. Or I do apologize, John, if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, but you talked about judgment of behavior in people, like predicting outcomes and stuff like that. And I think that's super interesting. And it's super useful as a planner, because you know, the older I get in this industry, I realize it's not just about having a good original idea. It's kind of what Aidan was saying, it's taking people on a journey, taking risk adverse clients with you on that journey. And I do think dyslexia helps with that. You know, it gives, I find like sometimes a bit more empathetic, or I can like get in people's heads and understand where are they going to go on that journey. And I think, you know, that I think of, it's great being a lateral thinker, don't get me wrong, it's super useful. But I think the idea of like empathy and persuasion and trying to understand what's going to pull the triggers of these risk adverse clients to make them do better work is actually the thing that I'm personally most grateful for. And obviously you don't have to be dyslexic to have that ability. There's people far better than I am, certainly. But I think that of all the skills is the thing that really resonates with me. And it's the thing I kind of relish and embrace the most, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's that Russell Davis thing, isn't there, about that as soon as you have an idea, you are continuously selling it. It starts to your boss immediately, and then it just goes through and through. So you're having to do that all the time. Thank you, Will. Good to have you back as well. And then Kat, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because we're sort of talking about dyslexic thinking, we're talking about lateral thinking, and we're kind of intertwining them. But for just generally in planning, what role does lateral thinking play? What importance does it have within a planner's toolkit?
Well, I think at its heart, you know, lateral planning, it really is it's a core planning skill when we think about it, because really when you think about lateral thinking, it's all about solving a problem creatively in an unexpected way. So it's not, as John talked about, solving it in a linear, step-by-step, formulaic or routine way. It's about being able to take a step back and seeing an unconventional way to solve a problem. And of course, when we're in an age where everybody is overstimulated with so many messages, that's key to giving your brand, your agency, you know, the edge to, you know, when your thinking is the foundation and the bedrock to everything that follows. And it's all about giving that, you know, foundation, as like Aidan was talking about, of freshness, of something that's got a kernel of truth in, even if it's, you know, slightly comes from a different place. I always remember Bridget talking about how, Bridget Angier from one of my bosses from AMP, talking about how, you know, reading broadly and how she'd read something about, you know, bats in a cave and about how that had helped her solve something for road safety. And I can't remember exactly what the anecdote is, but I think that sort of serves to, you all have to ask her about the bat anecdote that I couldn't remember. But I think it's all about seeing connections that are there that other people don't see. And, you know, we're taught to solve problems in a linear way at school. Often, I mean, I've never been diagnosed with dyslexia, but I really hear what a lot of you are saying and connect with. My dad is severely dyslexic. And I was smiling, actually, Will and Aidan, when you were talking about taking things apart and picking them back together again, because my dad's a mechanical engineer. And that's what he was doing all weekend long with our cars, just to my mum's chagrin on our driveway. But really, you know, lateral thinking is at the heart of what great strategists do. And when you thinking about possible outcomes, there's of course the, you know, futurists would talk about it as, you know, there's the probable future, which is the probable outcome that people coalesce around. That's the received wisdom of what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of the time, I would say, if I'm being harsh, maybe 80% of briefs coalesce around the expected place of where it could go. Aidan, you can tell me if you're the recipient of briefs. And, you know, there's the expected place. But then, of course, there are many different possible futures, as a futurist would say. And so it's about giving yourself the permission to go laterally into, as Will said, you know, the 20 different places. What are the ones that are going to stick, to find from all the different possibilities out of those, what are your top 3 or 4? And then out of those, finding what is your preferable future for your brand that you're working on. And then it's kind of a bit, I always think it's a bit like Queen's Gambit style, you know, sort of look it in your head. It's that synthesis of everything that happens of, you know, okay, it's like, I always think of it like a chessboard, you know, like any grandmaster, you can see everything 5, 6, 7 moves ahead. It's about anticipating outcomes, conversations, and you need to see that quicker. and you need to be able to scenario plan for stuff going well and stuff going not as well, and be able to have defend the idea at every single opportunity to push for greatness.
No, that's good. Yeah, no, listen, that's, yeah, fantastic description of what great planning should be. And I was really interested actually, because John, I think possibly the first time that you and I ever spoke, I remember you were talking to me about how, it's a little bit about what you were talking about up front, about how people who are dyslexic can make those connections, can think differently. And when we were talking, I remember saying to you, that's interesting, because sometimes I feel like we have to teach neurotypical people to do that. So a lot of our job is to say to them, well, actually, you've got to, if you do this, this, and this, you might get to that place that people who are dyslexic get to naturally. And I just wondered if there are kind of like, I guess what I'm saying is, can neurotypicals learn to think sideways? What can we learn from dyslexic thinkers?
Well, the first thing I'd say is they're never so good as dyslexics, but they could learn from dyslexics to deliberately look for all the elements of a problem and then search for it in the way a dyslexic would search for things that don't fit in, that don't fit the pattern. And often that's with the help of mind maps. Mind maps were basically developed by various people, but very much for dyslexics, because that's the way they like to think of things. Put everything down on a sheet of paper and then work out ways in which they may interact with each other. And you can teach neurotypicals to do that, but they'll never do it as well as dyslexics, I would say. I always like the story of Einstein sitting on imagining himself sitting on a light ray going at the speed of light, naturally, and being able to work out what was going to happen in the future, not in 3 dimensions, which all of us can do, not in 4 dimensions, which means throwing in time as well. But in his case, he claimed he could somehow sense in 10 dimensions. I'm not sure about the precise number, but anyway, far more than the average person can. Now, a boring mind like mine, I can't even conceive of what thinking in 10 dimensions would be like, but dyslexics can, and it's like magic. They can do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, because some of the things there is kind of like this unreachable ability for neurotypicals, but things like looking for anomalies, things like mind maps, throwing it out to Kat, Will, and Aidan, are they the kind of techniques, and are there other techniques that our lovely planners here should be thinking about and exploring in their daily jobs? Any of you jump in, please.
I was drawn slightly, sorry, Kat, go on.
No, you go.
And I was quite drawn to something you said about reading widely and connections. And someone said that to me quite early on in my career. You just read anything, like read an NHS leaflet in a waiting room, read Heat magazine, read a banner, read you don't have to read War and Peace, but like just read, however short or long or whatever, just read as widely, don't be snobby, and just draw connections from those things. And actually one way I work is, if you're stuck on a problem, I look at sort of quotes, or so say if the problem is around, I don't know, the tone or the brief is something around joy. For every brief seems to be joy at the moment, but it's joy. You look at, you type in joy into quotes and you get all these really clever quotes about joy. And then you sort of almost draw connections to the product from that. And I find it sometimes unlocks, different thoughts. And I wonder if it is the sort of dyslexic in me finding random connection. Can you connect that back to your brief in an interesting way? And it unlocks things. And I wondered whether that might be quite a good way with a linear thinker to sort of force yourself to, have lots of different connections and link things back by saying, right, this back of this Mars bar packet says this. Now, how can I link that back to I don't know, the car brief or something. Do you know what I mean? Like you're sort of forcing yourself to make really weird connections, and then that might unlock it in an interesting way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful tip. That's great. Kat, what were you going to say?
I love that you use quotes too. I do that, but I actually type in quotes and then I go to the image section and then I search on stuff in terms of, you get quotes and they're put on like backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. So seeing how people are using them, that's where I get a lot of texture in briefs from. I would probably say to go out there, be bold and brave and have some provocations, like allow yourself, how much, do we ever really allow ourselves to be that courageous in our thinking and have, a provocation, but attach that provocation to wishful thinking, like an exaggeration or a reversal or a distortion or, something that is slightly alt and off the normal. And, you just take inspiration from, I heard a talk from someone who was talking about, they were the chief of staff for Jeff Bezos, and apparently he goes away for a 5-day retreat. He goes like every year, and he's completely starved of anything, not food, but doesn't have like a pen, a book, a phone, a computer. He has 5 notebooks that are empty and a pen, and he just that's how he got all of his ideas. And apparently off those notebooks, that's where he came up with Prime, like, web services, Alexa, like everything. He's still going off a lot of those. And you just think of, you can imagine, Steve Jobs saying, what if you had, 1,000 of your favorite songs in your pocket? And, that provocation, where has that got us from an invention perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's almost like an extreme version of is it James Webb Young thing of like cram your head full of references, influences, information, and then just stop, and gradually it will drop down into something creative and amazing. Yeah, that's fascinating, fantastic. Will, what about you? Have you got any tips?
I agree with most of that's been said, actually. I mean, what I like to do is probably not the most interesting approach, but is when you're kicking off a project, like really have a good conversation with the client or really understand the product. Pick out like 2 or 3 things, because ultimately whatever strategy you're doing, you're going to have to find a way to tie it back to that. But then you pick out like 2 or 3 key things about the brand or the product. And then like Kat was saying, like there's little techniques I use anyway, and I apply it to aspects of the business, like reversal, like, imagine a world without the product, what would that be like? Or if this product was a person, what would it be like? Or really over dramatize the benefit. Like I remember an example when I was at Saatchi's far too long ago. We did a pitch for Home Away, and Home Away is basically like a rental company like Airbnb, but the only unique thing about them is that they have the whole property, which is a bit boring, isn't it? It's a bit rational. No one's going to really remember that. But we realized, applying some of that methodology, what's interesting about whole property is that you can rent the whole home, and people aren't going on holiday with their families anymore. So, you take something about the company or the brand or the product, and then you can apply that lateral thinking as well. And I think the final thing is like, maybe I should try the quotes technique. I've not tried that. It's a good steal. I'm gonna steal that for myself. I suppose my guilty pleasure, and maybe it's just procrastination, I just spend a lot of time on YouTube watching random stuff, like documentaries on Vice to like, just like really weird stuff. And you never know when that's honestly, like I've written briefs based on some pretty weird stuff on YouTube I've seen over the years. So I do advocate procrastination and YouTube viewing on a regular basis as well. So
yeah, I think that's really interesting as well, because a real theme coming through this is that what comes naturally to a dyslexic thinker is that everything is connected. They can see the connections that neurotypicals can't see, but that we can, neurotypicals can train themselves by letting the weird in, because there is always a connection to be made, and that's where the interesting stuff comes from. So listen, I'm really aware that we've talked about all this in very positive terms, and one of the phrases, and hey, Leo, we've been guilty of using this a lot, is that dyslexia is a superpower. But there are issues as well, aren't there, that we have to face within the same things. And I suppose one of the issues that we should face is there is a lack of neurodiversity generally within planning. And I just wondered if any of you had any ideas of why that might be, and whether that's based on your own experience or what you've perceived with other people.
Can I just say that there's the real problem is that most people don't know enough about neurodiversity. They're ignorant of the things that neurodiverse people can provide and contribute. And somehow we've got to educate them better.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, that's one of the, if anyone goes on the British Dyslexia Association site, when they make recommendations of what companies should do, I think number one is raise the awareness within the company to lead to understanding, because without understanding there can be no movements forward. Thank you, John. What else? What do other people think?
I have a slightly unpopular opinion, if you don't mind me, if you don't mind me
Be
saying
unpopular, go for it, please.
Yeah, I think I don't know, the big problem, sorry, all the strategists that are going to hate me for saying this, but I think the big problem with strategy is this perception that you have to be the smartest person in the agency. Like the amount of agencies I've worked at over the years, which is, I know, no offense to anyone that went to Oxbridge, congratulations, it's a big achievement, but the amount of departments I've worked in where it's like 95, 99% Oxbridge. And they're good, get me wrong, they're really smart people, really good planners, but I would argue, what kind of like strategy department do we want, or do we really need? If we are in the diversity of ideas business, don't we need the diversity of thought? And are we going to get diversity of thought if everyone went to the same university and they're not neurodiverse? And I think the other thing is, I think it's all, that's like a philosophical thing, but I think from a pragmatic point of view, I think it's the way we get people into the industry. Advertising is notoriously bad. That like I remember I never saw an agency at my milk round at university. I kind of fell into planning, to be honest. It's the best kept secret. I love the career and the job, but no one ever told me about it. And I think we just have to get better at hiring more neurodiverse people at an entry level. Like giving people a chance. Sure, yeah, they can't spell very well. Maybe they read a bit slow, but invest in them, and I'm sure you'll get the payback. So I think philosophically, it's less about only hiring the smartest people and remembering that we are in the diversity of ideas business. And I think from a pragmatic point of view, there has to be at an entry level. This is like it's the World Cup at the moment, and England's getting a lot better, but that was a long journey. It took a lot of investment at the grassroots level, and I think equally with planning, you're going to have to start hiring now more neurodiverse people today to have the net benefit. And the CSOs of 10 years time will only come into fruition if you start hiring more neurodiverse people now. But sorry to anyone that's from Oxbridge on the call, by the way. I'm a big fan of all you do. It's just my opinion.
No, but I think it's a really good point there, because I think, generally, I think that's true about diversity, is that diversity involves investment and commitment, and agencies involve deliver now, this second, and those two things rub up against each other, and nothing will change until we take, like you're saying, that longer term view. What about you, Kat and Aidan? What about you? What do you think around this?
I'd say it's also about truly, we talk about it a lot, but truly embracing and celebrating difference, and recognizing that actually, having, I love that you talked about cognitive diversity. Well, it's something that I like bang on all the time about, always trying to make, build departments that are, broad and have really different shaped thinkers in it, because I think, we're better if we're not all cookie cutter. And I've been on the receiving end of being in planning departments that are quite cookie cutter and are quite Oxbridge and very linear thinking, and that isn't me, and I do have a different way. But I think then so it's incumbent on us as people who are hiring and building departments to be thinking, well, actually, I can see the flame in that person, and I can see what is special in them, and I'm going to nurture that flame, and I'm going to turn it into like a raging like fire, and not trying to get people to like dim to fit in. Like we've all been there, haven't we, when you just feel like you're having to put on somebody else's clothes, and it's horrible. It kind of diminishes you, it diminishes the work that you're doing. And so and recognizing when you see a rough diamond, put that work in for that rough diamond to bring out their specialness, because my goodness, are they going to be like, shining and special and different and brilliant, rather than just the expected. And I think everyone's got that specialness in them, and it's just about nurturing that, but especially about bringing people in who are neurodiverse from different places. So, and that's just about not, let's like fight the status quo and the predictability that is, taking over our industry, and bring a bit of like rebel different voices who challenge the orthodoxy. I welcome that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, well said. Aidan, what about you? What about the places you've worked at, the place you currently work at? Do you see a lack of neurodiversity in planning? Is that something that you focus in on?
Yeah, it's interesting. My observation of the planning department is it's quite sort of haphazard how people end up in planning. So in the creative department, we have placements, you know, every age. 20 years ago when I started, I was on a placement, and you get a placement by having a portfolio of ideas. You speak to the placement team that organizes the placements, you buy them a pint, they might give you a placement. It's quite a kind of well-trodden way of getting in. And, you know, quite rightly, there's been a big push in the creative department to try and bring unusual creatives in through that, not just through ad schools, and there's a lot of programs to really help with that. But there's a very sort of clear way in, and it's about breaking down the walls for creatives and bringing those interesting people in. Planning, my observation, everyone comes through grad schemes, so you've got to be a graduate, so you've got to have gone to uni, and you've got to have filled out that form and say that you were the captain of the rowing team, or, you know, you did the local radio thing, or, you know, like all the clubs that you did. And then you might get a look in, and you do a little grad scheme, and you do a bit of account management, a bit of planning, and then someone says, oh, I think you're a planner, and then you become a planner. And there's sort of not, I mean, I don't know, I mean, every agency, I've been at AMV, you know, my sort of longest stints, AMV, Adam and Eve, BBC, and they were all grad scheme things. And I wondered whether one way of really increasing neurodiversity is actually having a planning placement scheme that goes into places and offers a placement specifically in planning. And this is what you need to do to be a planner. This is how you approach it. You know, it's really quite, because that's what we do in creative, but it's just not done in other departments, you know, and that might be another way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. And I think it's also really interesting what you're saying, because, and sort of broaching what Will was saying as well, is that too often smartness is equated to academic excellence, and they aren't the same things, and they're particularly not the same things in the world of work, when the ultimate output is a creative thing. And I think, yeah, there's lots of planning that we see, isn't there, that's too hidebound by that. And Will, something that he's talked about before, you know, hidebound by someone critiquing your spelling rather than your strategy when they see your PowerPoint slides, which is never helpful for anyone. But I'm really conscious, sorry, this is really interesting, we're probably running over time now. I'm really conscious that people might have questions to ask. And before anyone asks a question, I'll just actually read out a comment that Mara put in the chat, that she's saying that I think the lack of neurodiversity is closely related to people feeling uncomfortable around the ones who are not radically different. It makes them not trust the neurodiverse people because they find it difficult to understand them. The result, they keep hiring people that think the same. And I think that's true of neurodiversity, and that's true of diversity generally, really, isn't it? Is that if something seems difficult, if people feel awkward around people and not quite knowing how to act, then simply they don't come in. And what happens is we end up with that affinity bias, where everybody is just the same as us and we're not aware that we're doing it. So I think it's a really, really good point.